I've always had a curiosity about older games, the ones that people call classics, but I've never really gotten around to playing. When I was younger, my dad gave me a Sega Genesis, so I've played games like Sonic and the old Aladdin game. But the first game that really drew me in was Halo, and so for the next 10 years, I played almost nothing but Halos 1 through 3. This left a lot of really good titles off my radar for so long, and Daggerfall was one of those games. I heard that it was massive, which was intimidating, but that it was also really important to the history of RPGs. So I finally decided, you know what, it's time to give it a real shot. And I have a lot to say. This is long overdue. I was hesitant to talk about Daggerfall for a reason I'll make clear later in this review, but those of you who know how I play games know that I spend a lot of time in the games that I love, and even more time behind the scenes than what I show y'all in what has largely been my first playthrough of any given game. And Daggerfall was no exception. I really leaned into this game after I played it the first time. I still have a playthrough with a battle mage that I built not too long ago that I still have to finish, I think once Elden Ring wraps. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that the map feels endless. Real early on in my playthrough, a fellow YouTuber came to my channel, How Big Is the Map? And I watched the Daggerfall video where they just walked the Daggerfall map in 15 videos. According to the description, it took 69 hours and 33 minutes to walk the entire map. You have access to High Rock and Hammerfell. It's this huge world with hundreds of towns, guilds, and factions, and you can kind of go wherever and do whatever you want. At the same time, I'll admit, it's overwhelming. I spent my first few hours just wandering around, getting lost, trying to figure out what I was supposed to be doing and where I was supposed to be going. And that's kind of Daggerfall in a nutshell. It gives you everything, but it expects you to figure out how to use it. I like RPGs, so I really liked that. I like journeying into the unknown. Once I pushed past that initial confusion, I started to really appreciate what Daggerfall offers. There is a lot of freedom in Daggerfall because you can play endlessly with different builds and access different game elements. And I like the way the game tracks your reputation with different factions. But what I like most about Daggerfall's mechanics we'll talk about a little bit later. The dungeons are confusing. They're huge and sometimes they're frustrating. I found myself a little nervous wandering deeper and deeper and not knowing if I'd ever find my way out. It does create a kind of tension too. Also, the modding community has done a ton of work to keep the game alive, especially with Daggerfall Unity. I enjoyed the original DOS version back when I played in 2020 and even today, but I'll admit with Unity, you get a smoother experience without really losing anything. I can't pretend it's all perfect. The game shows its age, the controls take some time to get used to, the combat feels clunky, and the sheer size of the world sometimes works against it. Towns can start to look too much alike, and quests often feel pretty repetitive. I'd be lying if I said I didn't get frustrated sometimes, especially when a dungeon layout just refused to make sense. And the doorways felt too tight for my character, and the ceiling felt too low in some of the dungeons. Also, I wanted to say a quick thing about the soundtrack and the sounds in the game. Daggerfall is one of the scariest sounding games I've ever played. I would welcome a debate on whether Daggerfall is a horror game. I mean, just look at the cover art. And then there are the bugs. Even in Unity, you run into quirks. Quests don't always trigger right, enemies behaving strangely, objects not in their proper places. Some people might call it Daggerfall's charm, and maybe it is, but it's definitely something to keep in mind if you're used to smoother modern games. The dungeons and the dungeon maps were the most diabolical parts for me. I got lost a lot. And I'm usually someone who likes a maze, but something about these dungeons just frustrated me so much. A lot of quests I did had a lot to do with dungeon dives, and that's fine, but the dungeons are huge and winding. I've actually seen other players use a mod to locate the enemy, like a quest marker. I don't know if that's built into Unity, but that doesn't really solve it for me because I like a little exploration, but many of the dungeons take hours to get through. I think Daggerfall would have benefited from smaller dungeons. This review isn't really about tips. I've played the game a few times now, but the reason I took so long to review it is that I never really felt ready. Daggerfall feels so big, and I'm sure there's even more for me to see. But if I was going to give one piece of advice that I don't think anyone more knowledgeable of Daggerfall would object to, I'd recommend Recall. For any build, Recall, and stick to the right-hand side of the wall. That helped. Also, I love that I can leave notes on the map. It was something that I figured out late in the game, but it was really helpful for me in later playthroughs. Also, searching locations on the main map was very beneficial and hugely necessary due to the map's size. The story is the most important thing to me when it comes to any medium. I could play a potato of a game as long as it has a great story, I'm invested. And I really like Daggerfall's main quest. It's political and it's messy. At the start, the Emperor sends you to Iliac Bay to find out what happened to King Lancitus, why his ghost is haunting Daggerfall, and to find a letter the Emperor sent to the Queen that he now wants destroyed. By the time I was deep into it, I was juggling multiple factions, royal houses, Daedric princes, and this giant political struggle over something called the Numinium, a godlike Dwemer machine. And there are multiple turns to take when coming to the end. And there are a lot of factions in Daggerfall. We have the Fighters Guild, the Mages Guild, the Dark Brotherhood, the Thieves Guild, the Knights, the Temple. And I love how your choices actually matter. Oh, and speaking of the knightly orders, there are a bunch of them, but you can only follow one. If you follow one, the others will reject you. But at certain ranks, they won't charge you for stuff around town. You'll get free stuff like nights at the inn, ship rides, and a free house. And you can't just join every faction like you can in Skyrim and become Archmage, Listener, and Guildmaster all in one playthrough. Here, reputations actually matter. If you're cozying up one group, you might alienate another. Some of my favorites were the Mages Guild one, where I had to find a rebel mage that the Mages Guild wanted me to defeat, but when I found him, he offered me to join him. And if you join him, things get really fun. He's very convincing. I also like the Dark Brotherhood one with the bard that sang rude limericks. I just think that it's funny that the Duke wanted him dead for a song. In the Dark Brotherhood, there's also a good one where you have to kill a traitor to the Dark Brotherhood, but as he lies dying, he said it wasn't me, the traitor is, but then he dies before the tale is told. And the mummy one with the Mages Guild and the expired Rathmans, where you have to find a mummy and get the Rathmans off of his body in some random dungeon. And there's one where I had to exorcise a Daedra. And oh, the haunted house one with the temple, where I had to kick out the dead former owner. He didn't like that very much. I liked all the Daedric quests that I did for the Daedric princes. I really like how they appear in this constellational background. I especially liked Azora's. She was mad because some priest was saying some really rude things about her and she wanted me to do away with him. A lot of princes wanted me to kill annoying mortals on their behalf. Meridia's was intense because she wanted me to go after a sorcerer who summoned Daedra on me. Some princes sent me after werewolves, vampires, their servant Daedra who were disobeying, but it was always funny hearing their reasons for wanting them dead. Pyrite calls his vampire unattractive. And one thing I wanted to note, Sheogorath talks a lot more like the Mad Hatter in Daggerfall. He uses the words my unbrothers and non-sisters, and later says to a tea party with me. And when he said that, I stopped and I wrote it down because I wanted to remember to include it. He's always been a Mad Hatter character, but I felt like he leaned into it more with his word choice in Daggerfall. As for side quests, they're a mixed bag. Some are intriguing, like hunting down a rogue werewolf or rescuing a child from the Dark Brotherhood, but some of them are pretty generic. It's like the whole game is one big fetch quest, but the charm lies in the stories enveloping it. I never know if I'm finding a cure for some random noble or getting rid of a mummy's curse. There are a lot of people to meet in Daggerfall. Some names you might know if you've played the other games. Some names I recognized, like Queen Berenziah. I read her books. And she's the Queen of Wayrest and her whole family's there. She has a special quest for you about her biography, so you get to find out more about that. Manamako is there too. I got to meet the King of Worms, and he hadn't aged a day. He's not a fan of the Underking. I really liked Morgaya. She was beautiful, and she had a cat, which automatically endeared her to me. She's the daughter of Queen Berenziah. The gods didn't really like me very much. It's really been the only Elder Scrolls where they were really nasty to me. but I was on my best behavior in Morrowind and Oblivion. But you know, it wasn't really my fault in Daggerfall. I was bitten and they wouldn't let me get unbitten and I was punished for it. Character creation is probably one of the deepest in the series. You're not just picking a race and a sign. You can customize your class, pick advantages and disadvantages, and really balance your skills. I always liked the older games' approach to character creation more so than Skyrim's pick a race and go, although sometimes I am in the mood for that. There are 18 predetermined classes, plus you can make a custom class. Each class has major and minor skills, special advantages and disadvantages. You're asked a series of questions that help guess which class would suit you best, but you still have the freedom to reject that class and choose whatever you want. There are honestly so many options in character creation alone that it would take me hours just to do a complete overview of character creation. At first, all the choices were very overwhelming, but I grew to like having so much control and customization options. But like I said, sometimes I'm in the mood to just pick one or two things about my character and go. But Daggerfall punishes bad builds, so the only freedom you don't have is the freedom to make rash decisions. They also have some holidays and they let you know when they're doing a holiday. I think it's a nice touch. I say bring back holidays and maybe change the world up a bit for holidays. Maybe for a few holidays in the Elder Scrolls 6 we could have some decorations hanging around. Maybe we could have the vendors sell some unique items on holidays. We're never getting the Elder Scrolls 6 though. Maybe I shouldn't even mention it. There are a lot of shops to go to. You have your standards like the armorers, the bookstores, the clothing stores, your general stores, taverns, inns. They have furniture stores, but those are really just mattress firms for the Thieves Guild. They do have a Daedra summoner, and he can summon a Daedra for you, and then you can take the Daedra's quest and maybe get an item. I like how they make the Daedra summoning ritualistic, like summoning a demon in a horror movie. I think it's better than only having the option of going to shrines. Personally, I like to force my Daedra out. There are witches' covens too that you can just happen upon. I tried to befriend one in my first playthrough, but it didn't work out. I did see some unique ingredients for potions like nymph's hair and unicorn horn and fairy dragon scales and a ghoul's tongue. Yeah. I do like that about the Elder Scrolls, the effort to give each game some of its own unique ingredients. I like especially in Daggerfall that metals can be used like in the original version of alchemy. The idea of ingesting metals to give you special abilities like in Mistborn is pretty cool and would have been an excellent use for all the silver nuggets I found in Oblivion. Similar to Skyrim's alchemy table, you go to a potion maker or the Dark Brotherhood to make potions. Funnily enough, the alchemists in Daggerfall don't buy or sell potions. Alchemists sell ingredients and recipes. You also have to be a certain rank to brew potions in most places like the temples. Personally, I like traveling with my alchemy set like in Morrowind and Oblivion. I do use jewelry in the game, but only for its enchanted effect because jewelry does not appear on your character, which I know is a small thing, but I would really appreciate if the jewelry could be seen on my character. I did like that there are a lot of slots for jewelry. Not only did I get slots for rings and amulets, but I also got slots for bracers, bracelets, marks, and crystals. And I got 2 slots for each, so I could really load my character up with enchantments and create even more customization. There's also a variety of clothing, including robes and dresses that you can wear under your character's armor. And the clothes aren't just fashionable, they can be enchanted. They can also be layered in a lot of different ways. I also saw some paintings, mostly of mountains and cows. I'm sorry I wasn't able to capture any. Paintings are very rare to find in my experience. Sometimes I'd see one at a random general store, but it was interesting to see that even as far back as Daggerfall, art matters in the Elder Scrolls. Unlike Skyrim's more tactile art in its carvings and tapestries, Daggerfall reminds me more of Oblivion, where we see more paintings. For leveling, Daggerfall uses the classic use a skill to level it system. But if you didn't build your character right in the beginning, you could get stuck. Personally, I love it because it makes every decision matter, but if you're used to Skyrim hand-holding you, it could be a shock. I didn't look into leveling mechanics before my first playthrough, so I learned very late in the game that I should reload if I get anything less than my 6 attribute points and my max HP when leveling. This is important because leveling is capped. Skyrim kind of goes in the opposite direction where you can level indefinitely with legendary skills. But story-wise, I like that my character can't be everything, not only when it comes to factions, but also when it comes to skills and leveling. I like that things are hard won in Daggerfall and builds are more locked in. You can't really step too far outside of who you are at the beginning, but you can become better. Like in Morrowind and Oblivion, attributes govern certain skills. I like the complexity of builds, skills, and attributes that the earlier games bring. Skyrim simplifies the leveling system, but I prefer the more complex systems. Daggerfall also offers background history to player characters by asking questions like, as a child, your nickname was? How you answer could determine the items, skills, or reputation that the game gives you. Answers can also lead to disadvantages. Your frail health as a child has made you nerfs your poison, disease, magic resistance, or fatigue, depending on how you answer. I like how the questions further customize my character in Daggerfall. It kind of makes every playthrough feel unique. You have a lot of freedom with weapon choices. You have long swords, maces, claymores, axes, daggers. And the material matters. You can't even hit certain enemies unless your weapon is silver or better, and I like that that adds to the strategy of the game. There are a variety of different materials that weapons and armor can be made of, from worst to best: leather, chain, iron, steel, silver, elven, dwarven, metrol, adamantium, ebony, orcish, and daedric, mostly identified by their color. The array of weapons is really broad. I don't think I've seen a flail in any of the later games. Or a tanto. Tanto may be in Morrowind. Flail, though I think arena, but not later games that I know of. It's a shame. Flails are pretty cool. We also have artifacts most of us would know, like the Daedric artifacts. We also have Manamako's amulet, which can absorb spells. I also tried to get Herseid's ring, but they wouldn't let me. They let me in later playthroughs. We also have books that we see in later games, like Baranzaya's books. But it's a bit different, and there are different versions of her book in the game itself. I think I want to do a separate video about the books, because if I say too much, I'll run the risk of making this whole video about the books. I do love that a few of the books have survived into future games. I also like that some of the ones that I've read don't seem to be word for word with the same titles that I've read in the later games. Which is realistic, because over the years, even with real books, word choices might change and even whole passages. There were some titles I don't think I've seen in later games, like the King Edward books and the one about Wayrest. There are others I suspect, but correct me if I'm wrong about those two. Interestingly, there is no imperial race in Daggerfall, so the 9th province of Tamriel is not recognized as having its own race. Which I like, because an empire for all the people of Tamriel that's sort of a melting pot seems appropriate. I didn't like, however, that the orcs weren't considered their own race. You can't pick to be an orc. Here's the part that's a little horrifying. I typically play as a Khajiit, especially on my first playthroughs, but Daggerfall's Khajiits don't look as much like cats as they do in the later games. They look more like people, but they do have tails. What's a little disturbing is that they're described as tawny-skinned people, which makes me think they don't have fur, which means that their tails are fleshy and on human bodies. Daggerfall has a large number of skills, including climbing, because yes, Daggerfall is very vertical and has 3-dimensional maps, which are absolute terrors to get used of. A lot of the skills that are virtually unheard of in later games have a lot to do with languages. Centaurian, the Centaur language, Daedric, Dragonish, Giantish, Harpy, Impish, Nymph, Orcish, and Spriggan. Some skills were combined in later games, like swimming and running became athletics. Medical and restoration were sort of combined. Skills like streetwise and etiquette were lumped into persuasion. Thaumaturgy was done away with, and its various magics were absorbed into other schools of magic, like charm into illusion, detect life into mysticism, and levitate after Morrowind was removed from the games entirely. Skyrim further pares down the skills to only 18. I've always loved diseases and their various names in the Elder Scrolls. Of course, I don't like contracting them in the moment, but I appreciate their presence in the games. Daggerfall has some of the best names: Caloran's Curse, Stomach Rot, Wizard Fever, Blood Rot, Dementia, Leprosy, Red Death, Swamp Rot. Some of these diseases, I believe, also exist in Arena. Of the many diseases I contracted in my first playthrough, the one that affected me the most was lycanthropy. I was infected by a werewolf and terrorized the townfolk for some time. I tried to cure myself, but the quest bugged, so I stayed a wolf. The people didn't like that very much. I also liked how the vampires had their own covens and their own quests. They really are a faction to themselves. I didn't really mess with them much in my first playthrough, but I tried them in a few other playthroughs, and I liked how there were a variety of bloodlines. And I did suffer some damage from the sun, but I got some new spells like Levitate, Charm, and Calm Humanoid, and a lot of attributes and skills were increased. Many of the enemies in Daggerfall seem to be unique to the region. You do have your rats and bears and assassins, mages, werewolves, vampires, atronachs, and daedra. And there are some liches too. But there are also some more unique enemies. Centaurs, dragonlings, lamia, acrobats, mummies, and you do see flesh atronachs, which you can also see in Oblivion, but only in the Shivering Isles. A lot of spells in Daggerfall I did see in other games, but there were some special ones, or at least things about ones that I had seen before that were different. Jump, slow fall, and levitate are very important in Daggerfall because, like Morrowind, there are a lot of vertical spaces in Daggerfall that are accessible. I did like the name of the paralyzed spell Medusa's Gaze, but I felt like it was more of a nod to this world rather than the Elder Scrolls. I also like the name Energy Leech. That was a cool spell. And the Hand of Decay disintegrates an enemy on target, which is a cool name and effect. I liked the Strength Leech, the Vampiric Touch, Shadow Form, Holy Word. The spells didn't just have cool effects, but the naming was very good. It reminds me now of Oblivion, because I also really like the names of the spells and potions in the original Oblivion too. Tongues, I think, is unique to Daggerfall because it increases the comprehension of languages in the game, which is a lore aspect that was dropped in later games. It's just a rule now that everybody understands everybody else. But the creatures that you could interact with through language was a feature that was just dropped. Orcs became their own playable race, and now they just talk like everybody else. And a lot of the enemies that had their own specific language in Daggerfall don't really appear in later games. You can also make custom spells using the spell maker that you gain access to when you join the Mages Guild. I understand that spell making has a bit of a learning curve, but I wish it wasn't one of the many things they dropped from Skyrim. They replaced it with different strengths of spells, which isn't really an addition because we still had that in past games. And I know that spells can become overpowered in this way. I just wish they could have nerfed spell making a little without removing it entirely. I think it is a neat bit of world building to have mages who could learn to make their own spells. Maybe access to it could happen at a higher level or after quest fulfillment with the college. I just want it back. I like having it as a possibility, even if I don't use it in every playthrough. I do also really like how much reputation mattered. That aspect of the game was so real to me, it just made so much sense. Completing certain quests can gain or lose you reputation points with different groups. And if your reputation is too low with a faction, they won't even talk to you. So your reputation precedes you, and it's hard, if not impossible, to please every faction in a single playthrough. And of course, crimes affect your reputation. And as much as I like Skyrim, that is an aspect of Skyrim that I don't like, that I can be everything all the time, all at once. That I could, by contrast, level every skill, become leader of every faction, and even block out the sun in a single playthrough. And it's not just me saying it, other players are saying it. Many of you might also be saying it. But Daggerfall doesn't allow you to do that, at least not easily. You are very bound to your build, and that affects what quests you take, what factions you side with, and what reputation you earn. For all the randomness that Daggerfall can have, this aspect makes it all feel very interconnected. You know, this is an aside, but in terms of scope, you can tell that Starfield tried to do what Daggerfall maybe was the first to do well, and it failed at that. I'm not as critical of Starfield as other players, but Starfield's randomness in its planets being procedurally generated didn't give that feeling of interconnectivity, but instead created vast emptiness. And I think maybe the reason goes beyond literal emptiness, but also figuratively, because even the stories feel empty. And for me, the story is the most important part, and I had so many criticisms about the main quest, the DLC, and even the faction quests too. I just hear a lot of people talking about empty planets primarily. I just wanted to add my 2 cents. I don't hate Starfield, but I just feel like there could be improvements. For all the ambition that people say Daggerfall has, Starfield had it too, and I felt like it wasn't as good of an experience. in quite a few ways, I feel like it missed the mark. And I'm not saying that Daggerfall was the best to ever do it, but there is a lot that Daggerfall gets right. And it is the foundation of so much of what we have today, and actually so much of what we've lost today in modern RPGs. So here's the big question. Is Daggerfall still worth playing today? For me, the answer is yes, with some conditions. If you're going in expecting Skyrim with old school graphics, expect to be disappointed. But if you're going in like me, curious about the history of RPGs, wanting to experience a world unmatched in scale and freedom, then it's absolutely worth your time. I'd even go as far to say that Daggerfall is one of those games that make you rethink what RPGs can actually be. It's rough and it's messy, but it's ambitious in a way that most modern games shy away from. So yeah, I'm glad I finally played Daggerfall. And it's not going to be for everyone, but if you're willing to put in the effort, it still has a lot to offer even today. So if you love lore and role-playing and you want to see where the Elder Scrolls really became the Elder Scrolls, you gotta give it a shot. Just maybe don't start the way I did and just grab the Daggerfall Unity mod. It'll make the experience a lot smoother. I'm sure there's more to be said. I don't know if I'll ever be finished with Daggerfall. It feels like every time I play, I learn something new about this game. I never operate with any kind of guidebook, so I'm just fumbling around, learning as I go. And I like it that way because I love discovering things, especially through experience. But I know that means there might be things that I neglected to talk about, or things that I just didn't focus on that you might love. I hope for those of you who have played Daggerfall, we can have a nice little nostalgic discussion in the comments. And I hope that this video invites at least some of you who might be more like me, who are curious about older games that they might have missed. Maybe you wanted to watch this video so you didn't feel like you were going in completely blind. So I give Daggerfall 3 sweet rolls out of 5. I think that's fair, considering the game practically forced lycanthropy on me. But I had a lot of fun, even as a wolf, as a creature, and I was able to play a few cleaner playthroughs after that. None perfect, but all enjoyable. Anyway, I could talk about this game forever, but I want to hear from you. Have you played Daggerfall? Are you thinking about it now? Thank y'all for hanging out with me and sharing my journey through this classic. Through this classic makes me feel old. Comment your thoughts below, and if you enjoy this, maybe check out my Morrowind deep dive next. Until then, safe travels in Iliac Bay. Thank you for watching, and if you're looking forward to my Morrowind video next, don't be afraid to subscribe. Bye y'all.